The hospital accidentally swapped my and my husband's medical examination forms. My husband thought that I was the one with cancer. When I was preparing to sell my company shares to pay for his treatment, I overheard him whispering to our son, "Just pretend for a couple of days. Once the old hag dies, I'll bring your mom back home." Our son nodded, his face full of joy. "Great, I can finally be reunited with my mom." There was a problem with the printer at the hospital's examination department, and my husband's examination forms were mixed up. The intern scratched his head and explained this to me, apologizing repeatedly. The incorrect examination results had already been sent to your husband via text message. Looking at the form with my name on it, which showed late-stage pancreatic cancer, I felt utterly distraught. So, is it my husband who has late-stage pancreatic cancer? Yes, but don't lose hope, sister. Medical technology is very advanced now, and there is still hope for a cure. I walked out of the examination department with the report. What should I do? My husband Charles is only 36 years old and has this disease. Our son Ethan is only 10, he can't lose his father. Trembling, I took out my phone. "Lisa, please inventory all the assets under my name right now. I might need to raise a large sum of money soon, to take Charles to the US for treatment. He can definitely be cured." I returned to the pediatric ward. Since our son needed N4 for his cold, Charles and I had taken the opportunity to get a checkup at the hospital, never expecting to find such a problem. On my way, I was still thinking about how to gently tell Charles about his illness when I heard the father and son whispering inside the room. I leaned closer and heard, "Son, just pretend for a couple of days. Once the old hag dies, I'll bring Chloe back home." Chloe? The name sounds familiar. It seems like the mother of one of my son's elementary school classmates is named Chloe. Then I heard my son happily respond to his father, "Great, I can finally be reunited with my mom." What? I was struck as if by lightning. Could it be that Ethan is not my son? I pushed the door open, wanting to confront the father and son about what was going on. When Charles saw me return, he stepped over and embraced me. "Evelyn, don't be sad. I know about your cancer." I was so angry at their words that I felt a lump in my chest. Charles thought I was still upset. "Don't worry, our son and I will accompany you through your final days. If you have any wishes, tell me." Incredulously, I pushed him away. "What do you mean by that, husband?" Our son also forced out a couple of tears. "Mom, I heard that chemotherapy makes people old and ugly." "I don't want you to go through chemotherapy," sob. I clutched the examination report tightly. You want me to give up treatment?" Charles hugged me with a pained expression. "Late-stage pancreatic cancer is very hard to cure. Instead of spending money and suffering, it's better for our family to spend the remaining time happily together." "Evelyn, you're so understanding. You must understand the difficulty and necessity behind my decision, right?" Wow, so my life is decided by their few words? Fortunately, I'm not the one who's sick. Then I thought of something and hugged Charles tightly in return. "Husband, then I'll sell all my company shares, and we'll use the money to enjoy our last days together." Hearing that I wanted to sell the shares, the father and son stopped their tears. "That's not necessary. If you sell the shares, after you're gone, our son and I will have nothing left." Suddenly, our son shouted, "Mom, if you die, that's fine, but why do you want to take our family's money with you?" "Mom, you're so cruel." I clenched my teeth so hard that I almost couldn't resist the urge to kick this little brat. I wanted to see what evil plans the father and son had, so I turned around with a gentle expression. "All right, I'll listen to my husband and son and everything." After leaving the hospital, I immediately hired a private detective to investigate the relationship between Chloe and Charles. Charles and I had signed a prenuptial agreement that if he cheated, he would leave with nothing, so I wasn't afraid of him fighting me for the property. As for Ethan, from their conversation, it seemed like he wasn't my son, but he was clearly the child I carried for 10 months and gave birth to with great difficulty. How could he suddenly not be my child? I went home, took Ethan's toothbrush, and rushed to a private hospital for a paternity test, which could be expedited and results obtained in 4 hours. In the meantime, I went back to the office. Lisa was quick and had organized all my assets. "Evelyn, here is the list of all your movable and immovable properties and cash. Please review it." I took the folder, glanced at it, and closed it satisfied. Good. Last night I dreamed that I suddenly had no money, which scared me so much that I had to check my finances today to feel at ease. Lisa was used to this. "Don't worry, Evelyn, we're all working hard for you. We won't let you become poor." I patted Lisa's hand as she reached for the file. "Calm down your resentment. Go tell HR to give you an extra performance bonus this month for your diligent work." The young girl happily ran out upon hearing about the raise. At that moment, the private detective called. "Miss Evelyn, can I call the police?" I was puzzled. "What's wrong?" "The Chloe you asked me to follow is abusing a child. In front of the school teachers, Chloe is very kind to her son, gentle as water. But as soon as they reach a less crowded place, she takes out a thin, long steel needle and stabs her son with it." When the detective first started following them, he noticed something off about the child's walking posture. He tailed them for 2 blocks before seeing clearly that whenever there were fewer people around, Chloe would stab her son with the needle. Since it was summer and the clothes were thin, almost every stab went into the flesh. Logically, a child that young would cry or scream in pain, but Chloe's son didn't. He just kept his head down and walked silently, as if his mother's actions were all too normal. It seemed the abuse had been going on for more than a day or 2. Worried about alerting them, I advised the detective not to call the police yet. First, gather more evidence of her affair with my husband, and then find a chance to get the boy's DNA. After hanging up, Chloe's abnormal behavior sent chills down my spine. After all, no mother in the world would be so cruel to abuse her own child. If she and Charles had conspired to switch my child, then the one she was abusing might actually be my biological son. How could I stand by and do nothing? At that moment, the results from the private hospital came out. I flipped directly to the last page of the document. The result was unexpected. Evelyn is Ethan's biological mother. So, Ethan is my son? Then why did Charles say those things to our son? Was he trying to drive a wedge between me and my son to pave the way for his mistress? Over the years, I had been busy making money and, trusting Charles, had entrusted him with our son's education. Presumably, under Charles's years of brainwashing, our son had already come to see the thief as his mother. After much thought, I decided to call my friend Sophie, who was far away in the U.S. When my due date was approaching, Charles was often out and about, and I felt he was unreliable. So, during the delivery, I asked Sophie to accompany me throughout the process. It wasn't until after I gave birth to our son that Charles finally showed up. Perhaps she knew something about what happened back then. When the call connected, it was noisy on Sophie's end. "Evelyn, why did you think to call me? Did something happen?" I gripped the phone tightly. "Sophie, I have something important to ask you." The noise on Sophie's end suddenly stopped, and then I told her everything that had happened recently. "Evelyn, I remember now. There was indeed something I didn't tell you back then. When you were unconscious and being wheeled out of the delivery room by the nurses, Charles came over with a dark expression. He saw me talking to the doctor about how to take care of you and reached out to take the baby from my arms. Since you had told me before that he was unreliable, I didn't dare give him the child. At that time I found it strange. Who becomes a father and looks so unhappy? So, I was cautious. Back in the ward, I took the red string from my wrist and tied it around the baby's knee, where it wouldn't be visible unless you looked closely." Sophie paused and lowered her voice. Unexpectedly, when I came back from the bathroom, I noticed something different about the baby. When I checked, the red string was gone. I rushed out of the ward and saw Charles and a woman sneaking away. My heart leaped to my throat. Why didn't you tell me all these years? Sophie chuckled proudly. Because I switched the baby back. I followed Charles all the way and waited outside until he and that woman fell asleep, then I secretly switched the baby back. At that time, you had a difficult childbirth and were unconscious for a long time before waking up. How could I tell you about such a thrilling but ultimately safe incident? I thought I'd tell you slowly later, but then I saw you living happily, so I didn't mention it. I thanked Sophie, but she teased, I'm coming back next month. If you want to thank me, show it with actions. When I got home that evening, Charles and Ethan had the nanny prepare a full table of seafood. Mom, it's such a pity that you can't eat seafood because of your late-stage cancer, otherwise you could eat with me and Dad. I glanced at Charles. Our son hasn't fully recovered from his cold yet. What do you mean by preparing so much seafood? Charles was taken aback, clearly having only thought about celebrating halfway and not considering this aspect. He said to our son, sorry, son. When you're better, Dad will make you another feast, okay? Seeing the seafood he was about to eat gone, our son glared at me viciously and then ran back to his room in anger. For the first time, Charles didn't go to comfort the child. Evelyn, come sit here. I have something to tell you. I walked over and sat down, curious to see what nonsense he was going to spout. You have such a serious illness, and it's all because I didn't take good care of you. Charles put on a tearful act for a while, but seeing that the food in front of him was getting cold and I wasn't responding, he stopped sobbing and started eating with his chopsticks. I thought he might say something decent, but I was disinterested. Husband, I'm a bit unwell. I'll go back to my room first. Charles quickly grabbed me. Wife, could you make a will first? I raised an eyebrow and sat back down. What are you thinking, husband? Charles, while chewing, laid out his plans. We signed a prenuptial agreement, so don't worry, wife. I won't take a penny of your premarital property. I scoffed inwardly. Is it that you don't want it or that you can't have it? But we only have Ethan as our son. I think all your property should be left to him. All these years of driving a wedge between me and my son were probably for this day. Suddenly, I felt a surge of anger and slapped Charles hard across the face to vent. Charles was stunned by the slap and didn't react for a while. Wife, you. I shook my numb hand. Husband, wake up. If all the property is left to our son, what about you and your parents? Can't you stop thinking so much for me and our son? I know how much you've sacrificed for the family all these years. If it's acting, I can do it too. I pretended to be heartbroken and cupped his face. Husband, I must leave a share of my property to you and your parents. Although Charles had been slapped, he was satisfied with my assurance and continued to eat the seafood heartily. I thought to myself, eat up, husband, because each meal is one less. In the end, under Charles's insistence, my will designated our son Ethan as the sole heir to all my property. On the day of signing, Charles held my hand affectionately. Evelyn, you must believe in my love for you. I subtly withdrew my hand. Husband, I'm not feeling well. I'll go home first. Charles didn't suspect anything and had the driver take me home. He said he would go to the company to manage things on my behalf and told me to rest assured. I rolled my eyes inwardly. Then, I took out my phone and messaged Lisa to keep an eye on Charles's actions, hoping he wouldn't play any tricks. When I got home, I received a call from the private detective. Unexpectedly, they were quite efficient and had almost figured out the whole story in this short time. It turned out that Chloe was the daughter of Charles's father's mistress. The relationship was quite complicated. They were classmates at the time, and due to their parents' complex relationship, they naturally developed a twisted romance. Perhaps they enjoyed this forbidden love, so the relationship continued even after marriage. Suppressing my anger, I asked the question that concerned me the most. To be honest, I'm very curious about when their child was conceived. The detective hesitated. Your due dates were very close, so actually, your conception times were probably around the same time. Upon hearing this, I was so angry that I smashed the vase beside me. How dare Charles? When we were in love, he said I was his only salvation, but that didn't stop him from going to another woman's bed right after leaving mine. It seems they had been plotting to take my property for a long time, which is why they tried to switch my child. Fortunately, Sophie secretly switched the baby back in time, preventing this farce from succeeding. I wonder if Chloe, after abusing that child for so many years, would collapse when she finds out that he is actually her own son. I thought of a good idea. Find a way to have the neighbors call the police. After all, the child is innocent. The day Sophie returned, I picked her up at the airport. She asked me what my plans were. I said I wanted to wait a bit longer to see when Charles and Chloe would reveal their true colors. Sophie teased me, "Don't be caught off guard if someone comes to your door." Unexpectedly, her words came true. 2 days later, I saw Chloe in my own home. That day, as soon as I came downstairs, I saw Chloe grabbing Charles with both hands, and the two were arguing fiercely. After messaging Sophie, I went downstairs. Seeing the strange atmosphere between them, I knowingly asked, "Husband, who is this?" Charles panicked and pulled Chloe's hand away, accidentally pushing her to the ground. "Evelyn, I don't know her." I crossed my arms leisurely. "Is that so?" I stood on the steps looking at them. "Isn't this the mother of Ethan's classmate? You've attended so many parent-teacher meetings for Ethan, and you really don't know her?" When Chloe saw it was me, she struggled to get up from the ground. "Stop pretending. Evelyn, you little slut. It was you who switched my child. Give me back my son, give me back my son." I sneered, "Is that so? I only have one son, Ethan." "Maybe you're mistaken." Chloe roared and tried to grab me, but Charles held her by the waist. "Enough. What do you want? Coming here early in the morning, acting crazy, demanding we compensate for your son. Isn't your son at home?" Chloe, with tears and snot streaming down her face, looked at Charles and cried uncontrollably. "Wrong. Charles, everything is wrong. Ethan, he's not our son. Our son fell from the building and became a vegetable." Charles doubted his ears. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Chloe pounded Charles with her hands. "Ethan is not our son. The police had me and Jaden do a paternity test. He is our son." Wow. That name. No wonder Ethan mentioned before that there had been bullying incidents in their class. For sensitive children, a unique name like Jaden would inevitably attract excessive attention, even disgust and isolation. I added sarcastically, "Oh, why did Miss Chloe give her son such a name? I don't think Miss Chloe is uneducated." Chloe muttered to herself, "Wrong, all wrong." At that moment, our son came home from school with the nanny. When he saw Chloe, his eyes lit up, and without caring that I was there, he rushed into her arms, calling her mom affectionately, which brought Chloe back to her senses a bit. Out of the corner of her eye, Chloe saw the fruit knife on the coffee table. She grabbed Ethan by the collar and rushed towards it. I suddenly realized what she intended to do. "Chloe! Let go of my son." Chloe laughed maniacally. "Unexpected, huh? Your son is still in my hands now. He calls me mom, haha." Ethan was frightened by Chloe's crazed appearance. "Mom. Mom, I'm your son Ethan, Mom. What's wrong with you, sob?" Chloe viciously pressed the fruit knife against Ethan's neck. "Listen up. You're not my son, you're that bitch's son." I tugged at Charles's sleeve. "Husband, what do we do? This crazy woman has taken our son hostage." Charles was still weighing the pros and cons, only caring about what was most beneficial for himself. I was annoyed by his cowardice and prepared to rush over and knock Chloe down to prevent her from harming my son in her madness. But unexpectedly, Charles was faster than me. He rushed over and tackled Chloe, then quickly pushed Ethan and me into the room. Outside, there were sounds of intense fighting, and Charles' seemingly concerned shouts, "Don't come out. Don't call the police. Wait until I handle this." Expressionless, I took out my phone and opened the app. Charles, don't stop me. I'll kill him to atone for our son." Charles reached to grab her knife, lowering his voice and growling, "Chloe, snap out of it. Have you forgotten? Ethan has long recognized you as his mom and obeys you. Besides, Evelyn's will is already set. After she dies, if Ethan doesn't listen, we can arrange an accident to kill him, and then all the money will be ours. With the money, we can treat Jaden, and he'll definitely get better." Soothed by Charles, Chloe finally let go of the knife. Watching the surveillance footage on my phone and hearing the two people I once loved most plotting against me, Ethan slumped to the ground, tears in his eyes. "Dad, you." He turned to look at me. "Mom." I sighed. "Now do you believe what I said?" After the paternity test results came out, I had talked to my son alone once. I showed him the report, telling him that he was indeed my son and that Charles was trying to drive a wedge between us. Ethan shook his head, saying the report could be faked and that he only trusted his dad. I told Ethan about Jaden's identity, but he didn't believe that the timid and pitiful boy in his class was his biological brother. "Shall we make a bet?" My son looked at me warily. "Let's bet on whether your so-called dad and mom will choose you over my inheritance. If they truly love you, I can let go and bless your family." My son readily agreed. On the day the will was set, Charles and Chloe took our son out to celebrate with dinner. At the table, our son mentioned the distribution of the property after my death. Charles and Chloe were all smiles, saying that the money was all his and that as parents, they would only manage it until he came of age, then return it all to him. Since our son was still young, his parents only wanted him to be happy every day. I have to say, Chloe and Charles were very good at keeping up appearances. Ethan was very happy, thinking he was going to win the bet with me. Now, recalling it, Ethan shook his head in distress. He bowed deeply and kowtowed to me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I lost." I helped him up and checked the mark on his neck where the fruit knife had scratched him. Although it was shallow, small beads of blood kept oozing out. "Let's go, Mom will bandage it for you." I took his hand and opened the door. In the living room, Charles was still comforting Chloe, who was crying in his arms, not noticing that my son and I had left. After bandaging my son's wound, he hesitated to speak. "If you have something to say, say it. A man shouldn't hem and haw." My son wiped his tears with his hand. "Mom, what about your illness? Is it still time for chemotherapy?" I pretended to cough a few times. "Cough? Didn't you say that chemotherapy would make Mom ugly and you didn't want me to go through it?" My son's face showed regret. "I'm sorry, Mom. It was Dad who told me to persuade you to give up treatment. He said that only if you died would all the property be mine." Choking up, I asked him, "So, you hurt Mom just because of Dad?" My son nodded, then shook his head. "Because Dad once told me that you were the third party who destroyed their love, so he hated you. At that time, I hated you too. I thought it was you who prevented our family from being together, so I said many hurtful things to you." My tears fell silently. "Son, do you know that when I gave birth to you, your grandmother insisted on a natural birth and wouldn't let me have pain relief, saying it would affect you? So, I endured the pain in the delivery room for a whole day and night to bring you into the world. Later, I fell unconscious, and that's when Chloe and your dad switched you. Fortunately, your Aunt Sophie was careful and switched you back when they weren't paying attention. If Aunt Sophie hadn't noticed, the one who was abused and became a vegetable would have been you, not Jaden." My son shuddered at the thought, probably recalling how his classmate Jaden was bullied at school because of his name. "Son, the hurt you and your dad caused me is real. To be honest, Mom can't return good for evil, so from now on, you'll probably have to live on your own. My son thought I was talking about my illness. He cried and threw himself into my arms. I'm sorry, Mom. Let's go to the hospital now for chemotherapy, okay? I don't want you to leave me. At that moment, Sophie knocked on the door. Evelyn, what about those two downstairs? I wiped my tears. No need to do anything. Sophie, do you believe that evil people will get their just desserts? Sophie nodded. I do. After that day, Charles moved out and went to live with Chloe. He probably thought that since I didn't have long to live, it was okay to come clean earlier. But unexpectedly, when Charles's mother found out that her son was living with the daughter of the mistress, she was so angry that she was hospitalized. Charles even boldly took Chloe to visit his mother, and Chloe argued with the old lady, unexpectedly causing her death from anger. Sophie told me this as a joke. That old witch tormented you a lot in the beginning, and now she's got her retribution. I didn't laugh but looked worriedly at Ethan, who was downstairs doing his homework earnestly. Sophie, do you believe in genetics? After all, Charles's father was promiscuous, and Charles is similar. So, Charles's son might not grow up to be any different. Sophie held my hand. Evelyn, don't be afraid. With me here, Ethan won't dare to treat you that way. Trust me. I nodded and held her hand back. Later, when I received a call from Charles, it was Chloe on the line. Evelyn, you damned bitch. What did you do to Charles? Why did he suddenly faint? I looked at the calendar. Indeed, the time was about right. I suggest you call 120. Calling me is useless, I'm not a doctor. Chloe cursed a couple more times before hanging up. I called Sophie, who was playing games. Let's go, Sophie. We're going to the hospital to watch the show. When we arrived at the hospital, I could hear Chloe's roars from afar. How could it suddenly be late-stage cancer? You quacks must have misdiagnosed. The nurse patiently explained, Miss, please calm down. We'll provide a treatment plan to minimize the patient's suffering. Hearing there was no hope for a cure, Chloe threw the examination papers on the floor in anger and left the hospital. I pushed open the door to Charles's ward. He was on a ventilator and still unconscious. The doctor on rounds asked who I was. I'm the patient's wife. Doctor, how is my husband's condition? The doctor shook his head. The critical condition notice will be issued soon. You family members should prepare for the worst. Charles's condition progressed rapidly. It seems his life with Chloe was quite comfortable, probably with rich meals every day. But as husband and wife, I still brought our son to see his father off. Ethan was still a child, seeing his once beloved father lying on the hospital bed, uncertain of life or death, he cried uncontrollably. Mom, how did Dad suddenly fall ill? Wasn't it me who had cancer? What? Chloe, who appeared out of nowhere, shouted. Ethan also widened his eyes. The hospital mixed up my and Charles's examination results. It was always him who had cancer. At that time, I was prepared to take Charles to the US for treatment, and there might have been a chance. Unfortunately, he chose to hurt me with you. Ethan shook his head, crying. Dad, so you brought this upon yourself by harming others. Chloe didn't listen, she just thought I had harmed Charles. Bitch, if you had said it earlier, Charles's illness wouldn't have been delayed until now. You're a murderer. I smiled self-mockingly. Miss Chloe, you should think about how to explain to the police, since you almost killed your own biological son. Before coming, Sophie told me that Jaden, who had been pushed down the stairs and became a vegetable, had woken up and identified his mother to the police for long-term child abuse. The police should be on their way now. Chloe wanted to curse more, but Sophie covered her mouth with her hand. Miss Chloe, this is a hospital. Don't make noise. Come, I'll accompany you outside to wait for the police. Sophie was a black belt in Taekwondo and could easily handle a delicate Chloe. After she took Chloe out, only our family of 3 was left in the ward. Perhaps it was the last flicker of life. Charles gradually regained consciousness and looked at Ethan and me by the bed. Son. Evelyn. I turned on my phone's video recording. If you have any last words, say them. Charles struggled to remove the oxygen mask and confronted me. Why, didn't you tell me about my illness? You, venomous woman. His agitated emotions made him cough. Our son Ethan, with red eyes, answered him. Dad, when it was said that Mom was sick, how did you teach me? Do you remember? Charles also recalled those words, realizing he had brought this upon himself. He compromised, you can have all my inheritance. I nodded. All right, your meager assets can go to anyone. Just, please treat Chloe well, and my 2 sons. I continued to nod. Anything else? Charles choked at my question, tears streaming from the corners of his eyes. If I could live again, I would definitely. I interrupted him. I've arranged for a renowned master to perform a ritual for you. Just pass away peacefully. Then, I put the oxygen mask back on Charles to avoid troubling the nurses. After Charles was pronounced dead by the doctor, I quickly processed his death certificate and paid extra for express cremation. Our son carried his ashes back to our hometown for burial. When Charles's father learned that I had handled his son's affairs so efficiently, he called and scolded me for half an hour. I put the phone aside and waited until he had run out of words before picking it up again. The old man was panting. Charles marrying you was truly a misfortune for the family. Dad, stop scolding. I've transferred $2 million to your account. The old man was choked by my words. You shrew. I didn't call for money. I've also found Maggie's whereabouts. Do you want it? Maggie was Chloe's mother, who, after being the third party and getting beaten up by Charles's mother, abandoned her daughter and disappeared. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Don't want it? All right, then I'll hang up, Dad. Send it to me, consider it me begging you. I hummed and hung up the phone. Just like Charles's dying wish for me to take care of Chloe, these father and son were equally disgusting. On the way back to our hometown, my son asked me, what about the future? I rubbed his head. The villa, the nanny, your dad's inheritance, it's all yours, so don't worry. Just grow up well. What about you, Mom? I'll probably live my own life. After all, I am myself first, then your mother. Moreover, what you and your dad did to me will always be a thorn in my heart. I don't think I can love you without any grudges anymore. Ethan should understand that on the day he lost his father, he also permanently lost his mother's love. After that, Ethan was left to his own devices. On his 18th birthday, Sophie and I began traveling around the country. Jaden's perspective. My name is Jaden. Since I can remember, my mother has never liked me. When she's happy, she pinches me a few times. When she's unhappy, she kicks me a few times. In short, I get beaten every day, to the point where if I don't get beaten one day, that day feels incomplete. She has used all the vicious words in the world to curse me. I don't understand, am I not her child? In kindergarten, I saw other children being kissed on the cheek by their mothers for getting little red flowers. I also wanted my mother to kiss me, but I was stupid and couldn't win any competitions, so naturally, I didn't get any little red flowers. In the end, I stole my desk mate's red pen and drew a few little red flowers on my arm, thinking that if my mother saw them, she might kiss my cheek too. Before my mother could discover the little red flowers, my desk mate found out that I had stolen his red pen. He and his friends pushed me into the toilet, threw the red pen into the urinal, and told me to pick it up with my hands. He said if I didn't pick it up, he would tell the teacher I was a thief. I was so scared that I trembled. If the teacher said I was a thief, my mother would definitely be unhappy, and then she wouldn't kiss me. I reached into the urinal to fish out the red pen while everyone jeered behind me. Holding the pen covered in urine, I begged my desk mate not to tell the teacher. My desk mate found me disgusting and raised his foot to kick me, but a clean-looking boy stopped him. He said, "Don't bully your classmate." From that day on, I knew him. His name was Ethan. I envied him because his mother loved him very much. Unexpectedly, in elementary school, I was lucky enough to be in the same class as Ethan. I thought he was different from others, so I talked to him more. But one day, I overheard him telling his classmates that he only saw me as an obedient dog, otherwise, he would never talk to me. That day, I felt a sourness in my heart. My mother also liked to call me a dog, but hearing Ethan say it made me feel much worse than when my mother said it. Later, one day, my mother said that hitting me hurt her hand, and I thought she wouldn't hit me anymore, but unexpectedly, the abuse escalated. My mother bought a batch of needles from somewhere. She said that needles hurt but don't leave marks, and her hand wouldn't hurt either. So, she started stabbing me with those needles. It was indeed very painful, especially when she stabbed my fingertips. I thought I could endure it without crying, but I cried harder than ever before. My mother got annoyed and pushed me, trying to drive me out of the house. I could only keep kowtowing to her, begging for forgiveness, begging her to pardon my tears shed from pain. Bullied at school and beaten, scolded, and starved at home, sometimes I wanted to end my life. So, when my mother pushed me again, I let my body fall backward, and I fell down the stairs. Regrettably, before closing my eyes, I didn't see my mother look out to check on me. I thought this time I could finally end this hateful life. But I opened my eyes again. There was a kind lady, like an angel, who asked if I was willing to report my mother's crimes to the police. At first, I was silent because I didn't know what to do. The lady gently touched my head and said, "It's okay, you've been very brave." After saying that, the lady was about to leave. Her gentleness was fleeting, and I was drawn to her. With difficulty, I said, "I am willing. I am willing to start my life anew."